First year, setting it to 80 books. I love a new year so much. I'm so excited to just conquer my goals, my reading, etc. for a new year ahead. It is January 1st, so happy new year. It's 10 to 9 on my first day back at work, and I'm already needing a cup of tea and some leftover Christmas chocolate. I've already cried from overwhelm. Yes, a cup of tea and chocolate, please, thank you. Hi guys, it's Rachel and welcome back to the first weekly reading vlog of 2025. It's currently Monday the 6th of January and I've actually already finished 2 books this year, which is crazy. I read over 600 pages already. I was meant to vlog that whole kind of experience of me reading my first book of the year, but I haven't done a weekly reading vlog in so long because I've been so focused on getting my Disney World vlogs up, which are now done and dusted. No pun intended. If you know, you know. They are now done, so I can actually start focusing back on weekly reading vlogs, which I'm so excited for, and I'm really hoping I can make them more consistent on my channel this year. It's kind of like a secret little goal. I'd love to do them weekly for the entire year and get like inspiration from Chloe. She's now on like vlog, I don't know, 300 or something weekly vlogs, which is crazy. And I just want to kind of like document my reading a bit more frequently this year via weekly reading vlogs. I feel like they're a great way to give you guys the thoughts and opinions that I have on books in more real time. And it's really nice to look back on weekly reading vlogs and actually see what my thoughts were on books as I was reading them. I'm really hoping to make them a little bit more frequent on my channel. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. I do actually want to sit down and discuss the 2 books I have read this year because, like I just said, I want to document my thoughts and my feelings on books in weekly reading vlogs more frequently. So I'm going to talk you through the 2 books that I have read and also my current read, because my current read is also really fun, and the first 2 books I read this year were both 4.5 stars. So like 2025 is turning out to be a good reading year so far and I'm so excited. But also, talking about the 2 books I have finished, I am tracking my reading in a lot of different ways this year. So I want to sit down with you guys and actually talk through how I'm tracking my reading this year, because there is Notion, there is Goodreads, there is Storygraph, there is Fable, there is my reading journal. There's just a lot of cogs in this big kind of like wheel that is me tracking my reading this year, because I want to get all of the fun stats at the end, like I always do. But I'm not using Corepile this year, so I want another way to get like those fun pie charts and bar graphs, etc. that I'm not clever enough to create myself. So I'm using a lot of different tools and I want to sit down and discuss exactly what those tools are with you guys, maybe to give you some inspiration or just kind of like if you're nosy. So that's another thing I want to do as well in this vlog. And other than that, I'm just going to take you along in my week, see what we get up to. It is kind of like a realistic week in my life in terms of reading, because today is my first day back in work after the Christmas period, which is so sad. I decided to take the 2nd and the 3rd of January off, so I had like a good 2 weeks off work between Christmas and New Year, which was lush and lovely, and it didn't make me feel refreshed. It didn't make me feel ready to go back to work. It was the opposite. I mean, the taste of freedom and just like, if I could only do this for the rest of my life and not work and just read books and create content, that would be amazing. So let's kind of like, I don't know, manifest that for the future. Who knows? Fortunately, it is a 5-day working week, so I'm going to take you along on just kind of like what I actually managed to get read on my first full week back at work. Realistic. I do an 8 till 5 working hours, so I'm not like a 9 till 5 girly, I'm an 8 till 5 girly. So just gonna take you along on like how much I get read this week as well, and just kind of like see what we get up to. But those are all the things I want to kind of like discuss with you in today's video. Before I get any further, I do want to sit down and show you how I'm tracking my reading for 2025, so let's jump into it. Obviously, you all know about my reading journal, and if you don't know, then I have 2 whole videos kind of talking through this bullet journal for 2025. So it has everything in this journal, and this is how I'm documenting my reading physically and manually this year. Everything else I'm tracking is going to be digital, so I'll link those videos up above and down below if you're interested in watching my 2025 bullet journal setup video, or my New Year reset, where I go into more depth about what all the spreads that I'm using in these bullet journals are used for. And I've started using them already and I'm absolutely obsessed. So I'm really excited to continue throughout the year filling all of the spreads in, especially because last year I had a reading journal, but I didn't stick with it for the entire year. So I've never had a completed 365 days of reading journal spreads in like a physical journal. So I'm really excited to delve deep into that this year. And then obviously being a Notion girly, I have a reading spread in my Notion, which is completely different to my reading spreads in my Notion in previous years. And that is because I'm not using Notion this year to track my reading in the traditional sense. I'm more using it to plan my reading. So let me just show you and I'll talk you through it. So this is my new reading dashboard in Notion, and it's called my Cozy Library because, like I said, it's less about tracking my reading and more so about documenting my reading and scheduling it and keeping it on track without like tracking the stats, etc., etc. So because it worked so well for me in the past, I still have my reading schedule off to the right, which basically has a plan for when I want to read the books and how long I want to read the books for in an ideal world. Previous years, I would amend if it took me shorter or a longer time to read the book than originally planned. I would amend the calendar to reflect that, i.e. I'm currently reading the Dixie Rule, and if I manage to read it in one day, I would amend it and just have it for one day, and it'll give me an actual record of what I read and when I read it. I'm not doing that this year. So let me just jump that back, because I'm tracking that actual reading schedule in my bullet journal. So I don't want to double up on information. This is just kind of like my plan for the month of when I'm going to read books and how I'm going to read the books, and hopefully how many pages I'm going to read and need to read each day to read all the books I want to read each month, which sounds quite a lot. On the left-hand side is my monthly TBR, and in this view of my dashboard, I have the tick list of when I finished the book, the title of the book, the way I've read the book, so whether it's a physical book, which is highlighted by this yellow emoji, whether it was an ebook / obviously Kindle, which is represented by the phone emoji, and then if it's an audiobook, represented by the headphones emoji. And then finally in this view of dashboard, I have the prompt that book fulfills regarding my TBR game. And if it's a mood read, it's just highlighted in blue because it wasn't part of my monthly TBR. It's just books I actually want to try and get in as an additional read. It's, bear with me. Bear with me. So that's kind of like the top area, and then I just have some extra views. So if we go into this one, it's just, I'm going to have a document of every single book that made a monthly TBR this year. And then I was going to have my physical TBR down digitally as well, but I have a spread in my bullet journal for my physical TBR. So I'm actually probably going to delete that page, and I'm just going to delete it now because I just don't see myself using it. And then I also just have a section of books currently piquing my interest that are not kind of like on my physical TBR. They're not books I'm planning on reading, just maybe books that if I have extra time, I may want to try and squeeze in, or maybe prioritize for the future months, etc. And all of these databases that you see right now are all connected into one. They're just spread out into different views. So obviously we've got a checklist, we've got the calendar view, and now we're coming down to the table view, which is the exact same information. It's just shown differently because this is where I calculate how many pages I need to read each day to read the book across a certain amount of days that I have planned in my calendar at the top. So I write the title of the book, how many days I want to be reading that book for, the total amount of pages, and then I write in how many days I want to be reading that book for. So the 1st to the 4th of January, it was a total of 4 days. And then with a formula I've created in Notion, it gives me how many pages I need to technically read each day automatically. So for example, say if 5 Letter Lane wasn't 450 and it was, I don't know, 380, it would amend how many pages I need to read per day across the 4 days I've scheduled it for. And then I've got a tick box to whether I've actually managed to read it or whether I started reading it and DNF'd it. That's what those two columns are for. Then I've got a rating because I really want to know what my average rating this year is. There isn't Goodreads, because in Notion, obviously I can do 4.25 stars, I can do 4.5 stars, I can do 2 stars. I can just have a bit more freedom with the ratings that I give if I do it on Notion, and it'll give me a more accurate average rating across the year. And also monthly as well. If I just categorize just the books I read in January in this table, it'll give me an average rating for just that month, which is also really important to me. So I've got my rating in here. That's a bit of a rogue one. It's there for a purpose. And then the last tick box I have is whether it was on my physical TBR or not. So I can just see at the end of the year or at the end of the month how many books I read that were off my physical TBR. And currently, if I read all the books on my January TBR, 50% of them have been off my physical TBR, which is very exciting. As per the top checklist, I have which prompts each book are for regarding my TBR game, because as you know, if you see my January TBR, I'm not putting the prompts back in the jar as I picked them this year. So it'll be really interesting to see which prompts actually come out of the jar across the year as well. So I've made a note of all the prompts. So that's kind of like how I'm tracking my reading in Notion. And then quickly we have a digital list of my priority list. And I've done a whole video on my 2025 priority TBR, which I'll link up above if you're interested in watching it. But this is kind of like breaks it down for me to easily tick it off and feel more accomplished. And then I also have a checklist of all the rereads that I want to read this year. So that's kind of how I'm tracking my reading in Notion, which is definitely the most complex way that I've ever tracked my reading. And I really hope I stick with it, because I think it's going to be a really fascinating way to track my reading in terms of like how I wish the month would go compared to in my bullet journal how it actually went. So Notion versus bullet journal is kind of like dream versus reality. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how this works across the year, but I'm really excited to see how it goes, and I think it's going to work really, really well for me. So that's my Notion reading spread, and that's the only reading spread I have in Notion. And then we obviously have the classic Goodreads. I've set my Goodreads goal at 80 books this year, and Goodreads is where I keep track of my physical TBR, my Kindle books, my books that I'm interested in that I don't own, and I want to kind of like, maybe if I'm feeling a bit stuck on what to read, I can come to that section of Goodreads and kind of like see if anything piques my interest. I have my anticipated releases shelf, I have my all-time favorites, I have my 5-star worthies, and then your like generic want to read, currently reading, and read shelves. So that's kind of like how I keep track of like all the books in one place. And then obviously I'm just going to use Goodreads, as you do, for reviews. I don't want to set it as a goal, but I would love to review more books this year, because what I find when I come to do my monthly wrap-ups is I can't remember what I felt about the book. I just kind of remember the gist, and I want to be more informative with my book reviews. So I'm hoping to write more book reviews in the moment of finishing the book. So then I have a point of kind of like contact to come back to when filming my monthly wrap-ups, and actually be able to talk to you about the books and my feelings more coherently than just be like, yeah, it was good, I gave it 5 stars, but I can't remember anything about it. So that's kind of like what I'm using Goodreads as this year. And then we have my reading spreadsheet that I brought off, I believe it was Ali from Hardback Hoarder. This is her 2024 one, but I've just adjusted it to make it my 2025 one, because I'd already brought the 2024 one. So I don't really feel like there's a need for me to buy the latest one. This one will work absolutely fine. And this is obviously like my replacement for Core Pile. The title, the author, my status, and then you've got the pages read, the hours listened, the month read, whether I owned it, which is once again kind of similar to whether it's on my physical TBR or not. My rating, whether I DNF'd it, which I won't be using, the main genre and the subgenre, which is interesting. It's the flaw that I found in this spreadsheet is that historical fiction hasn't come up in my overall genre pie chart, but it's come up in my subgenre pie chart. So I think I might just be using the subgenre column from now on, whether it's nonfiction, the intended audience, the format, the source material, whether it's physical, ebook, audio, whether it was part of a series, what the series was and what the series number was. Release year, which I'm not going to bother about. I'm not that fussed on whether I read books from earlier than 2019, etc. I'm not that fussed on a release date status. Whether the author was new to me or read before, diverse, LGBTQ, own voices, and then where it was required. I think it'll be really interesting this year, which is something I've never tracked before, the cover colour, and see if there's a pattern, because I've always said pink and blue books are my favourite books. It'll be interesting to see if that is actually true. The start date, the end date, whether it was a reread, and then trigger warnings, and then heard about from, which I think might be quite interesting to add in if and when I remember. And then this spreadsheet filling it in will obviously give me the majority of my stats that I'll talk about at the end of the year. And I really like how this spreadsheet is laid out. So we've got the little dashboard down the side. So we've got the total books, the currently reading, total pages, hours listened, etc. And then we've got a little like bar graph as it goes along to how many books you've managed to read for your goal. And then we've got a little like line graph for how many books you read each month, which is exciting. And then you do get an average rating at the bottom. So a lot of this information is repeated, but I don't really care. I just really, really enjoy collecting reading stats. So it's nice to have them all in different formats, and hopefully I'll be consistent and actually fill all of the things out that I'm hoping to track this year. And then the next tab is it broken down month to month. So this is more like an overview of your year, and then you've got it down month to month, which doesn't look as appealing to me. It'll be interesting to see it as it gets filled out across the year, but so far I'm not that fussed on this spread. I just really like seeing the pie charts. So that's the third way I'm tracking my reading this year. And the final way I'm tracking my reading this year, because I'm just that over the top, is I deleted my Storygraph and restarted and re-signed up to Storygraph, because I don't like how it actually imports all your Goodreads. I always wanted to start afresh for 2025, and the reason why I'm still using Goodreads and Storygraph is because I like all of the history that I have on Goodreads, but when transferring it over from Story to Storygraph, I find that it doesn't like work as well in my brain. So the reason that I'm using Storygraph this year is once again for the stats. It obviously tracks different stats to my reading spreadsheet, my Notion, and Goodreads. It tracks differently as well as with my bullet journal. It'll be really interesting to see the moods of books that I was reading, the pace of books that I was reading, and just get even more stats than I can barely hold together. So that is why I'm using Storygraph this year, just for the more interesting stats, the more unique stats. And also, once again, Storygraph allows you to rate in points 5s and 2.5s as well, so you'll get a more accurate average reading as well across the year, and I think done by month as well, which will be really, really interesting. So, and breathe, those are all the ways I'm tracking my reading this year. 4, so we've got Notion, my bullet journal, Goodreads, my spreadsheet, and Storygraph. 5, I've got 5 ways of tracking my reading this year. Maybe Fable. I'm using Fable more for just like my current reading and what pages I'm on. And then if you want to add another one, I also track my reading with Bookmori, which is this app just here, which allows me to enter my day-to-day reading. So the book that I'm currently reading, and then you can update it to every single time you get to a certain page count, and then it'll give you daily stats on how many pages you manage to read each day. And that's how I fill in my page tracker in my bullet journal. It's because at the end of each day I input into the app what page I'm on, and it will calculate how many pages I read that day. So if you want to add those 2 apps into the equation as well, I'm tracking my reading 7 different ways this year, but I cannot wait, and I'm so excited. And the fact that I've already finished 2 and I'm already starting to see some stats, it makes me so happy. So that's it for now. That's the segment that I wanted to get out of the way. And I'll come in a bit later on the books that I have managed to read this year and what my thoughts and feelings of it were. These are the 2 books I've finished so far in 2025, both being 4.5 star. So we have Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna and Spectacular by Stephanie Garber, which is so exciting. Hopefully this means that 2025 is really off to a good start. Fingers crossed. But I just wanted to come in with a little like reading update, where we're at so far at the beginning of this year. So obviously it is January 6th today, and obviously I have finished 2 books already. One being a 200-page novella, but the other being an almost 500-page contemporary, hard-hitting contemporary book at that. And this is the first book I started and finished in 2025, and I fell in love with it. Unfortunately, it wasn't the 5-star that I kind of predicted it would be, but it does follow a lot of buzzwords that really hit it off for me, i.e. very character driven, a lot of character development and self-awareness. It follows 2 best friends, which also is a massive buzzword for me as well, and you follow them through multiple generations, which is another massive buzzword for me. I think the only reason it didn't get a 5-star is because I felt the middle was a little bit slow, and sometimes it felt like it didn't need to be as long as it was, but I still felt very much connected to characters. I cried at the end. It was such a good book, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading it. It basically follows 2 main characters, Tully and Kate, and in the 70s, when they're about 11, 12 years old, they meet for the first time, both being in very different life situations at that time. Tully has had a very disruptive childhood. She is living with her grandma. Her mum is a drug user, so she isn't in custody of her mum. She lives with her grandparents, and she keeps moving around because every so often her mum will come back in her life and take her away again. And there's a point in the book where Tully and Kate meet for the first time, because Tully moves back with her mum to the town where Kate lives with her parents, and Kate has a very much more of a normal upbringing, and Tully and Kate end up going to the same school, and they end up bonding because they're neighbours, and they end up being best friends forever, and they start doing everything together. And this book follows them through the generations of them being friends for life, through the 70s when they're going through school and puberty and kind of really changing and figuring out who they are, to the 80s when they're going off to college and trying to figure out where their life begins, through to the 90s when they're starting their careers and falling in love for the first time and thinking about the future, to then having kids. And Kate very much goes down your typical family route, and Tully is very much after the fame and the fortune and wanting the world to love her, because I feel that she missed that out in childhood, and she missed out on having that sort of like real unit, and she had no one to love and no one to really love her after her grandparents passed away. So she's really thriving for that and kind of wanting that from her career and her fame. And it's that dynamic between the two of them when their lives really start to shift and change, and how they stay friends through that. And it very much gave me the same sort of like Olive vibe in Olive by Emma Gannon. If you weren't aware, it's one of my favourite books of all time. And what I love most about that is that it's a group of 4 friends where they're trying to figure out how they stay connected when all their life paths are going in such different directions once they finish university. And that this book very much had the same sort of vibe in terms of that. And I did cry at the end, and I was very addicted to this story and the way it was written and the characters, and I felt very, very much invested. It just didn't really give me that 5-star feeling, which I'm so sad about. So this was a 4.5 for the kind of like emotional attachment I had to it. This was a 4.5 just for the joy that it brought me being back in this world. This is the novella, the Christmassy wintry novella of the Caravel series by Steffi Garber. 3.5 I think is the official kind of like order. So you read the first 3 first and then you read this one afterwards. It's not a prequel or anything, it's just like an additional story set at Christmas time, following one of the sisters, Donatella, as she thinks that someone is pretending to be legend. Obviously, I don't want to spoil it too much, because if you haven't read the other 3, then this book does spoil the actual trilogy. But yeah, she believes that someone is pretending to be legend, so she goes after them, and the world is once again enchanting and magical, and it was whimsical to read, and I read it in a day. It's 217 pages, and I binged it all yesterday, and it was just a joyous time. It was a fast-paced book because there are so many beautiful illustrations that kind of like took up whole pages. So yes, it was 217 pages, but if you put it into like a normal formatted novel, you're probably reading about 100 pages of actual text. But it was so much fun to be back with these characters. It made me realize how much I love these characters, and I had such a fun time reading it. So those are my first 2 books of 2025. And then the books I'm currently reading that I started this morning is The Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy, which is the 2nd book in the Campus Diaries series, which is the spin-off series to the Off-Campus series by Elle Kennedy, which features the deal, the mistake, the score, the goal, and the legacy. And I'm loving this one. I'm about 50 pages into this one. I'm really, really enjoying it. It follows Gigi's best friend. You meet Gigi as the main character in The Graham Effect, which is the daughter of Hannah and Garrett from The Deal in the first series. So there's lots of like interconnected connections with this kind of like spin-off series, but I am loving it already. It's just nice and easy to read after reading like a really heavy kind of contemporary emotional book, and then going to like a fantasy, which yes is easy to read, but going back to like my heart and my core, which is a romance, is so fun. Dixon is annoying me ever so slightly, so I'm not sure it's going to get a 5-star from me, but I am only 50 pages into this book out of 490, so another big chunky book to start the year off. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and it's super easy to read and very, very bingeable. So those are the books that I'm kind of like have started, read, and currently in the middle of. And hopefully now we're just going to go back into a normal weekly reading vlog. Now I've caught you up on everything that I wanted to catch you up on. Happy Monday, and hopefully I'll check in with you tomorrow. It is now Tuesday evening. I am so cold. It is freezing. It is 0 degrees outside, and we haven't had the heating on this evening. Probably a bad idea, but it is what it is. I am freezing. I'm about to get into bed for the evening, but I wanted to come on with a little bit of a reading update because I'm currently in the middle of 2 books. So I wanted to come on and talk about them both to you. Don't mind my appearance right now. I did actually start the audiobook of Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton today on my commute to and from work. I have Audible for 3 months for 99p a month, so I was like, I'll take that deal, because they kept emailing me, and I was like, fine, I'll sign up. So I've been using my credits semi-wisely to get books off my physical TBR, and this was definitely one of the books that I've tried to read physically twice now and just couldn't get into it. So the audiobook was definitely going to be the way for me to go, and I'm not really sure where I'm at, but I am kind of enjoying it, but not like too much. Okay, I'm definitely over the 100-page mark because I've definitely read the list of the most annoying things people say. So I'm definitely past that. I think I'm about 130 pages in, which is pretty good going. I don't rate non-fiction, but this is definitely not the kind of book I was expecting it to be. It's definitely interesting, and the little section I have just read has captivated me more so because it's talking about how your friendships evolve from when you're childhood friends to when you start becoming like adults and have your own separate lives. You're less integrated into your friends' lives, and that's kind of a hard adjustment, which I can definitely relate to. And you really don't think your friendship's going to change in that dynamic from like constantly spending 24 hours with them every single day because you're in school with them, and then you see them after school and you spend so much time with them without realizing it, until then you start living your own lives and you spend less and less time with them and you see them for like 3 hours every month or so. And I did like that kind of like conversation, but a lot of it I'm not that interested in, and I'm quite surprised by that because I thought I was going to really enjoy this book. So I'm going to see how I go and kind of listen to the audiobook throughout my commute this week. But yeah, I'm happy to be like over 100 pages already into this book. And then I'm also still in the middle of The Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy. This isn't my favourite Elle Kennedy, just putting it out there, unfortunately. I was finding Dixie, or Diana, her full name, quite annoying at the beginning. It's definitely meant to be like enemies to lovers. It follows Diane, who lives in one flat in the same building, and Shane, who's just moved in to the flat across the hall. Diane is Gigi's best friend. Gigi is the main character in the first book, The Graham Effect, and then Shane is best friends with Gigi's now husband Ryder. So they're all kind of like interconnected, and Diane, Dixie, doesn't really like Shane whatsoever and is very annoyed that Shane has just moved in next door. So she tries to get the whole building to hate him because of something that she thought he did in a kind of like hookup situation with a girl on her cheerleading team, because she's not in ice hockey for once, she's in cheerleading in Briar U, which is a nice little twist that I wasn't expecting. So she's a cheerleader, not an ice hockey player. Shane is an ice hockey player though, so you're still kind of like getting that like ice hockey romance per se. And now all of a sudden the enemies to lovers trope has turned into fake dating. So I think now I'm about also 130 pages in, I'm 141 pages into this one. I feel like I'm going to start enjoying this one a lot more because now they're not so much enemies to lovers, they're more so like bickering, flirty, and now they're going to start fake dating, which is very, very exciting to me. So I'm going to get ready for bed, get into bed and read a little bit more of this. But yeah, happy Tuesday, and I'll keep you posted. It is now Friday the 10th of January and I finished my 2 current reads. I finished Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton yesterday, and I finished The Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy this morning. So before ending off this vlog, I just wanted to quickly tell you guys what I thought my ratings were, etc. on the 2 books I've just finished. I am now 4 books into my 2025 reading goal, 2 books ahead of schedule, which is so exciting. And I've rated all my books fairly highly this year so far, which is also really exciting. So I ended up actually rating Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. It just, in my gut, felt right because it read so much like fiction. I did listen to the entirety of this as an audiobook and really enjoyed my time listening to it, and thought I got more out of it listening to it than I would have done reading it with my eyeballs, which is why it's been sat on my physical TBR trolley for years now and I never kind of got round to it. So glad I finally picked up the audiobook with it being narrated by Dolly herself. I thought this really kind of enhanced the story. What I loved most about this book is the fact that it did really focus on platonic relationships and love compared to romantic love. There was definitely a feature of romantic love as Dolly Alderton goes through her life growing up, but The core and the heart of the story was her friendships, which was beautiful to listen to, and the end did really kind of like get to me, and it did kind of make me realise how important your friendships are throughout your life. So I gave this one a 3.5 stars. It took me a lot of time to get into this book, but by the end I was kind of very much invested. It was vulnerable, it was inspiring, it was motivating. I just really enjoyed the way she told her story. There are trigger warnings for this book, such as depression, eating disorders, cancer, death as well. And because it read so much like fiction, it was hard to sometimes associate that with the fact that this was a real life story. It is about Dolly Alderton's family, her friends, and what she's personally been through. So I think that's why it made it feel so much more vulnerable and honest to the reader, or listener in this case, because it was a non-fiction story. So yeah, really enjoyed that one, gave it a 3.5 stars. And then this morning I finished Dixon Rule by Elle Kennedy, which I gave a 4 star. So overall, so far in 2025, I had 2 4.5 stars with Firefly Lane and Spectacular, and then I've had a 3.5 and a 4. So going strong. The Dixon Rule wasn't my favourite book overall. I actually thought it was a little bit too long, and when I mean overall, I mean in the terms of like the Elle Kennedy Bri U universe. I do think it's one of my least favourites, but by the end I was hooked, I was gripped. But I did think it was a little bit too long. It's 480 pages, and I definitely feel like it could have been like cut down by at least 40 pages. Just to kind of like feel like the pacing of the book was just a bit more concise and consistent. The middle kind of felt like it's a bit dragging, it's a bit repetitive, which is why I didn't get the full 5 stars from me. But overall, I did absolutely love it. This one follows our main character, Diana, and why has the love interest literally just gone from my brain? His surname, I think it's because Elle Kennedy writes hockey players, so everyone refers to the hockey players with their surname and not their first name. Shane Linley. The love interest is Shane Linley, and he is the ice hockey player. Diana is a cheerleader. They live across from each other. Linley is trying to get over his ex, and Diana is trying to prevent her ex kind of coming too close to her because she told him it's over, but he's not really getting the message. So they end up fake dating each other. Oh my god, win win win. As soon as I realised it was fake dating, which wasn't until like 200 pages into the book, I was like, yes please. They start to fake date each other to help each other out in the situations, and it turns obviously into a love story from there. And I did really enjoy the growth of Shane Linley. Diana wasn't as much of like a lovable character in my personal opinion. I did find her quite annoying at times. By the end, after I'd read the 480 pages, I was swooning from them. I loved their banter, I loved their relationship, I loved kind of how it developed and grew. And for once, there was no kind of like major third act conflict. There was no miscommunication. They actually spoke like adults for the majority of the time. And what topped it up was the smutty, spicy sex scenes, because once again, Elle Kennedy can do no wrong in that department. She is queen, in my personal opinion, on writing smutty, sexy scenes. But A Dixon Rule really starts to evolve that kind of area of the book. Most of her books are obviously smutty and spicy, but The Dixon Rule is massively going into depth with that kind of category, and does start to play on the idea of threesomes. So if you're like, I can deal with a lot of smut, but it's not my favourite thing to read, I do feel like Elle Kennedy's really starting to delve deeper into that kind of erotica area, and her books are getting more and more spicy the more I read. Personally, I love it, but I know that some people, it cannot be their cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine. I just really, really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait for the Charlie Method that comes out in February, which is why I wanted to read A Dixon Rule in January to get ready for the Charlie Method. And the Charlie Method follows a main character called Charlie who we haven't met before, and then when she falls for 2 guys in the Bri universe, Will and Beckett, and I'm very, very excited to read their story. So I'm very much anticipating the Charlie Method now. But before I ramble too much longer, I'm going to leave this vlog here. I really hope you enjoyed coming along with me reading for the first week and a bit of 2025. I've read some great books so far this year, and I'm really, really excited to continue on my reading journey for this year and see kind of like what my average rating is, because that's one of my main goals for 2025, is to kind of increase my average rating compared to last year, which I think was like a 3.4, and so far with my highly rated books I've read, my average rating is a 4.2. So if you can keep that up, that would be amazing. But I'm going to leave this vlog here. If you enjoyed it, make sure you give it a massive thumbs up and subscribe down below to see future content from me. I do anything from weekly reading vlogs, monthly TBRs, monthly wrap-ups, and any other bookish content that you can think of. I do channel on the channel, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.